good to be here, giving this talk, and that's a lot to cover there. When you gave that introduction, I didn't know that. I think that was just from an email, maybe with Luke, but he had asked me to talk about some of our ongoing research. It's kind of a new research project, and I don't know if I can thoroughly cover all those topics that he had listed there in the beginning. But we do have some preliminary data from this project that we can share, and try to tie that into some of the habitat management practices that landowners can do to improve turkey habitat on their property if they're interested in continuing to see turkeys or attracting turkeys to their land. So it's a lot to cover. I'll do my best, but it's sort of a high-level overview, so keep that in mind. If you have follow-up questions, you can always contact me after the presentation, or type your question in the chat box. So let's see here. Okay, did that advance, John? Hopefully.
Yes, it did. I'm sorry.
Okay, it wasn't. It's on the wrong screen. But okay, so I'll give a little quick introduction, and there might be some real turkey aficionados here like myself that this is basic information. But for those of you that may be less familiar with the turkeys we have here in Maryland, some sort of basic biology information. There are several subspecies of turkeys in North America. The one in the eastern part of the U.S. that is the only subspecies in Maryland is the eastern wild turkey. And these are birds that, as you probably know, they spend most of their daylight hours on the ground. You rarely see them fly, but they can fly, and they can fly quite well. They do roost in trees at night, which some folks aren't familiar with, but they do that to avoid predation and get up off of the ground during night. So trees are an important component of their habitat, which we'll talk about a little later on. They feed on a variety of foods, seeds, fruits, green vegetation. They feed a lot on mast, hard and soft mast, things like acorns, berries, things like that. But they'll also eat animal matter, insects, slugs, salamanders, small frogs. If they can get it in their mouth, they will eat it, depending on the time of the year. Turkeys are exceptionally wary, and anybody that hunts these birds knows that they have exceptional hearing and eyesight. So it's estimated to be 4 to 5 times better than humans. They can really hear well, see very well. The joke among in the hunting community, turkey hunting community, is that if they could smell, then you would never get close enough to bag a turkey. And another interesting characteristic with turkeys are they are very vocal birds. They do a lot of communication among the flock, and they make a variety of calls. The males and the females, will call. The male is the bird on the left there. We typically call them gobblers, and these are the ones that gobble, as the name would suggest. They also are the ones that strut and display, sort of your typical, Thanksgiving image of a turkey. But they don't always walk around like that. That's mainly for displaying and showing their dominance and trying to attract mates. They oftentimes are slicked down and look more sleek, like the hen on the right there. And hens generally are a lot less colored. They are more cryptic, which allows them to blend in with the surroundings. And it's important for birds that are nesting on the ground that they aren't too colorful. So to put this research in context, I'll go back a few decades and just quickly talk about the population status of turkeys in Maryland through the years. And this graph goes back to 1970, so about the last 50 years or so. And you can see that turkey population has grown significantly. I mean, it's very impressive that we now have over 40,000 turkeys in the state. And just 50 years ago, we had less than a couple thousand birds. So this is the range of turkeys in 1970 in Maryland. They really were limited at that time to the western mountains, kind of the more inaccessible places. And historically, if we go back a few hundred years, these birds were widespread across the state. And like most wildlife species during that time, unrestricted hunting, extensive habitat loss through timber clearing resulted in these birds, these animals being pushed to these more remote areas. So that's where we were at in 1970. We had about a 3-decade turkey restoration program, where over that time period we released over 1,100 turkeys. We captured those birds where they still existed like I said, in the western mountains, and we also got some turkeys from other states as well. And then we moved them into suitable habitat throughout the state, and would release 20 or 30 here and there. They kind of did their thing. Their population increased, and we had a remarkable growth in that population during that time period. Population really boomed and took off and did quite well. We hit a period in the 2000s where populations really seemed to stabilize. We had abundant turkeys in the western and eastern parts of the state. These are the places where that just seemed like there were turkeys everywhere, large flocks. People were really happy to see them there. But elsewhere in the state, in the central part of the state and some of the southern region, we didn't have the numbers there. It was extremely low densities. Not quite sure why that was, but they just seemed to kind of sit at a low number and not really be able to get over that hump and really increase in numbers in a lot of the state. In the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen another increase in that population, and it's really being driven by these what I'm calling non-traditional regions of the state, so the more suburban areas. And again, we're not quite sure why they didn't take off earlier. Could just be that they needed some time to acclimate to living around people, and adapt to that different kind of environment with that kind of human population. But now they seem to be doing very well there, and not as well in the places that we have been accustomed to having turkeys. So. Here's a map showing our estimated population trends over the last 10 years. So this is more recent trend in what these birds are doing. And as I said, the western and eastern regions, we seem to have stable populations. In certain places, I would say that they're declining. Certain counties, noticeable declines of maybe 40 to 50%, which is somewhat concerning. But the increases are really driven by that central part of the state, where they're 7% per year. When you start adding that up year after year, is a tremendous population growth. So to kind of sum up the last 50 years of turkeys in Maryland, it really is a true conservation success story. We hear a lot about endangered species and our impacts on wildlife, causing them to decline. But here's a case where we've brought this species back from really the brink of extinction, and something to really be proud of. And this has been going on across the country. Every state was sort of in the same general situation, and years ago, and they did a similar, trap and transplant program to restore these turkey populations. But as we look towards the future, things aren't quite as certain. We've had this really, really nice, increase in numbers, and everybody was happy. Both hunters and non-hunters were happy that these turkeys were back on the landscape, and they enjoyed seeing them and having that resource available. But as we look into the next few decades, a lot of us biologists are starting to wonder, will this continue? And there are definitely some signs of problems that are concerning to us. And one of those is a lot of these southern states, so the southeastern U.S., they were really a few decades ahead of us with this turkey restoration. So they were doing the trap and transfer prior to us. They had strong populations going, for a few decades before we did. But since then, they're noticing that those populations have declined, in some cases upwards of 50% or more. And really what they're noticing is this decline in the number of poults produced. So, and I know that you can't read the numbers on these graphs, but basically these are every state in the southeastern U.S., and it's the number of poults produced per hen based on their annual surveys. And you can just see that general declining trend. It's very consistent across states where there's just not as many young being produced. This has, resulted in decreased hunter satisfaction, and these declines are really prompting some significant attention and in a lot of cases regulation changes. So they used to enjoy long spring turkey hunting seasons, and they're cutting things back and making things more restrictive due to these population declines. So what's going on in Maryland? We have a similar survey. Most states conduct these surveys almost exactly the same. Our survey is really strong. For those of you that have helped with this survey, really appreciate it. It's a citizen science-based survey where we get a tremendous amount of data about our turkey population from this. I think last year we had about 700. In the last few years, we've had 700 or 800 participants in this survey, and they see thousands of turkeys and record them, send them in on our online data entry form, and get some great data. So what we've noticed is a similar trend where we used to produce about 3 poults per hen, and now we're down in this less than 2 poult range in some years. Anything below that two poults per hen sort of threshold, we consider you might call like a danger zone. This is where you may not be replacing the birds that you're losing, the adult birds that you're losing, which will indicate potential population decline. So this is something that we're really keeping an eye on and somewhat concerned about. We can also look at our spring turkey harvest as an index of what that population is doing. And without getting bogged down in the details, we have some counties that are setting new record highs, but then all of the counties that are highlighted in red are at least, I think these are 20% or more down from their peak harvest, which again is an indicator of declining populations in some of these areas that traditionally have had strong turkey numbers. So because of this, these declines in other states and certain regions in Maryland, we wanted to try to get a handle on what's happening, what's going on with turkeys. And to do that, we kind of joined this collaborative effort with 3 other states in the region, calling it the Mid-Atlantic Wild Turkey Research Project. So we have study sites in Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Ohio. Basically, how it'll work is the state agencies collect the field data. we send that data to Penn State and the University of Pennsylvania, where their graduate students and their data managers will analyze that data and get us the results. I do want to thank the National Wild Turkey Federation because they do provide a considerable amount of funding to purchase this equipment, and it's not cheap. The transmitters that we're using are about $1,200 a piece, and we're doing 50 per year, so it adds up quick, and along with all the other costs. So why do we need this research? So like I said, these population trends are complicated. Turkeys aren't doing well everywhere. They're not doing poorly everywhere. We don't know why there's these differences around the region or around the country. We don't know really how many hens are successful in nesting and raising poults. We don't know the impact of predators, habitat, weather, disease. Where do hens nest? What makes a successful nest and an unsuccessful nest versus an unsuccessful nest? Where are these hens, if they are successful, where are they taking their young to forage? Now, these are all questions that we have, and also, are we sustainably harvesting gobblers in our spring season? We think that our season is not the cause for these declines. We're fairly certain of that, but we just want to, make sure and collect some data to ensure that we're doing the right thing and our management is not impacting the population. So kind of boiled down the objectives. It's a long proposed research project, but we've tried to boil these objectives down into a few key ones. It was to assess the impacts of weather, predation, and habitat on basically reproduction. What's affecting reproduction, because we know that that's probably what's driving this population. We want to look at disease prevalence, and there's at least one or two diseases that we're very interested in that may be having some potential impacts on hen survival or reproduction. And again, we just want to ensure that our gobbler harvest rates are within the guidelines to make sure that we're not over harvesting these male turkeys. So how we do it is we've got two study sites, one in Western Maryland, where it's the western three counties, and one in Eastern Maryland, which is the kind of the lower eastern shore, Dorchester, Wycomico, Somerset, and Worcester. We are trying to trap 25 hens per year to affix these GPS radio transmitters. Really the state-of-the-art technology. We get hourly GPS points from these transmitters, and then we also get very detailed data on the movement of that transmitter, whether it's moving up or down or to the side, so that we can identify whether that bird's feeding, whether it's walking, whether it's sitting on a nest, roosting. We can tell what that bird is doing pretty much every minute of the day, as long as that battery lasts. A lot of people wonder how long the batteries last. It's about 2 years that we're hoping to get out of these transmitters. We'll also be trapping and banding males, and our goal is 30 adults and 30 juvenile males per site per year. And this is the same methods that are being used on all of these study sites, which gives this project a tremendous amount of power as far as understanding what's happening, because we have different landscapes, different predator communities in this region, and it should be a great way to really understand some of the differences between turkey populations in these different regions. So part of that is we need to get our hands on these turkeys. This is just a quick video. I'm not sure if the video will work well, but essentially we bait turkeys to a location. We have this rocket net, and I don't know if you can see my pointer, but this little mound of straw right here. There's a rocket net under there, which is basically a big net that's propelled by 3 three metal rockets that have some propellant in it, and it'll shoot the net over these birds. It's a fun project to work on when you actually catch them, but we spend a lot of long days sitting in these blinds. Luckily here, this was a private property that had this deer hunting blind, which was nice to sit in, but usually we're just in a little pop-up tent, and it can get quite cold, and it can be a long time waiting for them. They don't always cooperate, but in this case, they came in, and we made a good catch here on these birds. Let's see if this video works. So yeah, so that was a successful capture there. There's a few that got away, but we snagged most of those birds and put transmitters on them, drew blood for disease testing, and banded the gobbler. So that was a good day. So last year we caught 217 birds statewide, and so we met our quota, and it all worked out really well. A lot of work and a lot of effort though. So let's get into some of the preliminary results. Again, this data will be analyzed much more rigorously and in more detail at the university level. This is just kind of some stuff that we kind of pulled out of here just to give folks a sense of the data that we're getting, get some early results. One of the interesting things we learned quickly was that these hens disperse widely. They generally their home range is about 500 acres, 1,000 acres, but certain times of the year, and one of those is in the spring prior to nesting season, they will really cover some ground to find a suitable nesting site. So this particular bird here went about 14 plus miles. She actually ended up going a little further after we snagged this graphic, and we had 3 or 4 birds go over 15 miles. Ended up with turkeys in Pennsylvania, turkeys in Delaware. So really interesting to see how they navigate this landscape. That a lot of times they use these riparian drainages, places where there was some tree cover to move around and get through these areas. So this was one of our primary objectives here, to see how many of these hens are surviving. And we were surprised that almost half the hens that we put radio transmitters on were killed during the nesting and brood rearing season. This was higher than we'd like to see. It may change from year to year. That's something that we're going to have to keep an eye on. But we always knew that this was the most dangerous time to be a turkey. I mean, they're sitting on the ground incubating these eggs for 28 days. They're very vulnerable to predation during that time. They're also trying to protect those eggs, so they wait to the last minute to flush, and sometimes they likely will defend that nest from predators. So there's a lot of reasons why this is the period of highest mortality. We did notice that mortality outside of that nesting season was very minimal. So there was maybe 1 or 2 birds killed prior to nesting season, but since nesting season. But most of the time, this is the time when hens are most vulnerable, is when they're sitting on those nests or when they're raising young. As far as what actually killed the birds, a lot of times we don't know. We just find a few feathers in the transmitter. Sometimes we know that it was a mammalian predator based on the evidence. Sometimes we can get a little more detailed. We did have some that we knew were raccoons based on the evidence that got a nesting hen. We had some that we knew were foxes. I think one was a coyote, a few were owls that killed the birds. And we had one bird die of disease as well. Some other preliminary results on nesting is that, and this is things that we kind of knew, but we wanted to confirm with this project. The laying phase takes about 2 weeks, so that they're going to lay one egg about every day and a half. So it takes about 2 weeks to have a typical clutch of eggs. My light keeps blinking off. The average date of nest incubation. So this is when they begin to, so they're laying their eggs, just going to their nest once a day to lay those an egg about every day and a half, and then they start to incubate those eggs, and that's when they're sitting there basically 24 hours a day, through the 28-day incubation period. It was a little later in Western Maryland, about 5 days later, but not significantly. We'll see if that trend holds true. But around the 25th to 30th of April was when most of these hens were beginning to incubate their nests. If their first nest failed, we had a lot of hens re-nest. So they would go and find another nesting location, and they would try this, up to 2 more times. I think we had a few birds that tried to nest 3 times. And continue to try. Just put a quick note in here. If you look at these dates, if you're a landowner or somebody that manages land, you really should limit your mowing or disturbance in areas that hens could likely nest in between April 1st and August 15th. That's kind of the window when these birds are out there sitting on nests, and any kind of mowing could impact those birds. So we noticed exceptionally poor reproductive success in the eastern study site. The western study site was low, but not anything that we would be too concerned about. Again, this is 1 year of data, and we'll have to see how this plays out in the next few years of this project. But in the east, we had 81% of the nests that were attempted failed, so they were predated or abandoned. But by and large, it was almost all predated. Either the hen was killed and the eggs were eaten, or just the eggs were destroyed. I think maybe one, the bird just abandoned those eggs for some unknown reason. And just so you know, our research, we do all this monitoring from a distance. We don't get within 200 or 300 yards of these nesting hens. So our research impacts are basically nothing. I mean, this is exactly what's happening. The technology lets us monitor this stuff from a long ways off. But yeah, generally about 75% of the nests failed, about 25% were successful. Of the ones that were successful, 57% of those broods survived to 2 weeks after hatching. But after that, they were pretty safe. We only lost another brood or two after that, and then by the time they got to 4 weeks, that's about the extent of what we can, how we can monitor them. After that, they join up, and those broods get together, and it makes it difficult to tell who's who. But the average number of poults surviving in those successful broods was 2.4. Here's a video of some of the infrared. We have infrared units that we can go in to count the poults that are surviving. This is how we get our counts. And see if this plays. These are up in a tree roosting in the dark, and we can just waking up, just becoming daylight. And you can see those poults coming out. They'll roost underneath the hens at night, kind of keep them warm and dry, and then they start to emerge and they fly down. So, okay, so just real quick on the gobbler harvest results. About 28% of our banded gobblers were harvested, and about 9% of the juvenile gobblers. So, it's well within the range of what most states report, and what we would consider a sustainable harvest rate. Okay, so we'll switch gears for a few minutes here and talk about habitat management. And assuming that we've got some landowners in the audience here, turkeys are often considered generalists, and they kind of are. They can do fairly well in a variety of habitat types, But what we're finding more and more is that without the necessary habitat, these populations just don't reach their maximum. You know, they might be there, but they just kind of come and go. And certain individual properties just are unattractive. You know, these birds have large home ranges, and if you don't have what they like, they'll use somewhere else. So this kind of is what you would think about. It doesn't matter which species that you're interested in. This is kind of the progression of questions that you would go through if you were contemplating doing some habitat management. But the first thing we need to do is know what turkey habitat is, and look at it by season. So we'll quickly talk about some of the general habitat characteristics. Like I said, they're usually found in or near forest, and trees are essential. Now, they really don't need as many trees as we once thought. You know, we used to think that they would need these vast expanses of forest. You know, that's kind of what was in Western Maryland, where turkeys still existed. And we thought that's just what they needed. It turns out that's just the only places that they were still left. You know, everything else we had kind of, you know, messed with so much that they were pushed out of those other places. But since then, we've kind of learned that they do best in a mosaic of forest and open land, which is what a lot of Maryland looks like. So yeah, you know, 50 mix of forest and open land seems to be pretty good for these birds, but that can depend, you know, where you're at and what the forest is comprised of, you know, what kind of cover there is there. Their home range is generally in the 400 to 2,000 acre range, so they're going to range over a large area. Unless you have a very large property, the flock of turkeys that you might see is most likely using somewhere else. So nesting habitat, and we talk a lot about this because nesting does seem to be the sort of the limiting factor in the ecology of these birds, and it's a very important time of year for them. And generally, they nest on the ground, typically in thick vegetation, and assuming that, it's kind of assuming, and actually the research isn't real clear on this, but we assume that that's to conceal them from predators, and it would make sense. They usually will pick somewhere, if given the option, somewhere very dense and thick to hide their nests. And as we've seen and kind of documented in this project, load nest success is very common, but they can re-nest and kind of overcome those losses typically. I will mention that usually you're not going to see turkeys in and around this nesting cover. And so it's important to understand that, you know, these open areas that the birds might use to feed in or to strut in, and you see the gobblers displaying, you know, these are places where hens are feeding and gobblers can be seen. Be careful that you don't assume that just because you see animals somewhere that that's really the habitat that they need. You know, they could do that somewhere else. It's just that you happen to see them there, but that might not be the limiting factor. And providing more of that kind of thing would not necessarily increase that population. Again, you know, the strutting area, you know, open area where these birds can display and gobble and be heard from a long ways away. You know, that's where we're going to see them. We're going to drive down the road and see them there. But we're not going to see them in that field with grass up to our chest. But that's where these hens are nesting, and that's probably the type of habitat that we need to be thinking about providing if we want to increase turkey populations. We have a lot of this kind of stuff in Maryland, you know, these fields, whether it's a food plot or a crop field or whatever, or forest that's, you know, really just bare understory leaf litter. These aren't places where turkeys will nest, and don't provide a lot of great habitat for many other critters as well. Here's a successful nest that from this study. She nested in this, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 acre overgrown field. And this vegetation here was up about chest high. waist to chest high. It was a combination of ragweed and briars, little sweet gum seedlings, tough stuff to get through. She was one of the lucky ones to hatch out there and did well. So that was an example of successful place to nest. An unsuccessful nest was one that nested here. Now, right at her nest site, it was very thick. It was a jungle of greenbrier, but it was in this very small linear strip of habitat, nesting habitat, and it was surrounded by mature forest all around or a crop field. So it was a very small linear strip that I think was just very easy for predators to hunt. And we see this time and time again if it's along the edge of a field or somewhere that is easy for a predator to run along there and scent check that area. Those nests did not last very long. And in this case, the hen was killed by a fox and actually was taken across the road and taken to the den site over there where there's a fox den. So for the nests that are successful, the poults hatch out. They just stay at the nest for a day or two. So we call it precocial. They're able to, get off that nest. They don't have to be fed at the nesting site like songbirds would. They're going to be off following that hen and be looking for insects to try to gain weight and strength as fast as they can. They're very vulnerable to predation at this time, and they also need insects. So they tend to gravitate towards these areas that have good cover. Grassland, shrubland habitats are ideal. Okay, so this is these areas, with wildflowers and various herbaceous vegetation. They'll also use managed forest, field edges, power lines, and anywhere that has this type of cover. There can be trees there, or there may not be trees, but they need that ground cover with a lot of insects. It's kind of a time where we, talk quickly about early successional habitat, and you may have seen some of this before in other talks. I know that when I do bobwhite quail talks, I often include discussion of this, but if you can kind of visualize it, taking a crop field and just letting it go, not doing anything to that crop field, what'll happen. And within 1 or 2 years, you'll have some grasses and some forbs, your ragweeds, your foxtails, things like that will start to, germinate and grow on that site. As you move along, you get 3 or 4 years down the road, you'll have a little bit more woody vegetation coming in. You'll have your blackberries, your small trees, small shrubs, things like that. And then, over time, trees will end up dominating that site. So early successional habitat is kind of that first period of time, 0 to 5, 0 to 10 years of succession. That is really important for a lot of wildlife, and we do not have this kind of habitat on the landscape like we used to have. Now, I wanted to mention that this isn't just brood habitat. This early successional habitat will be important for a variety of declining birds and pollinators and small mammals and a variety of other wildlife. This is the bird species that have declined the most in Maryland, and everything highlighted in red are grassland or early successional species. So the vast majority of the birds that are declining at the quickest rate depend on the same kind of habitat that turkey broods depend on. So it's important to understand that if you're managing for turkey brood habitat, turkey nesting habitat, you're helping a lot of other things that really are imperiled as well. Just an example of this was a successful brood. I don't know if you can see the detail on this. Basically, this is mature forest back here, mature pine forest. She nested back there, and then she took her brood, and then she spent the next, I think this is like a 2-month period, moving around this area here. This is about a 8-year-old tree planting. So visualize what that might look like. Still a lot of grasses, a ton of briars, very difficult to walk through. And that's the kind of places that they're spending time looking for insects and staying in that thick cover to avoid predation. Going back to our questions, once you know what habitat is, then you need to know what type of habitat is limiting on your property. So, what can I do to make it more beneficial and attractive? You want to look at the landscape perspective, big picture. Aerial imagery is great for that. Where's the roosting area, where are the large fields, understand that, and then get out there on the ground and look at what you have. And is it suitable? Is it good? It doesn't have to be as detailed as something we might do for a landowner, but get a sense of what's out there and what you need to provide. Look at the limiting factors. If you have all pine forest, there's no nesting cover or brood habitat there. There's really not even any food other than a few pine seeds certain times of year. So there's a lot of things that could be done in a situation like that. Crop field, you might have some roosting trees here, but there's no nesting or brood habitat. This is a very common situation in Maryland. And if you would happen to have extensive grassland areas, but very few trees, this is where you would think about maybe doing some tree plantings. Then lastly, once you know what's limiting, what turkey habitat is, what's limiting, what can you do to create or enhance those habitats? And this is kind of the fun part. You get to go out there and play around and try to do something that will help and result in better habitat on your property. Just kind of grouped it into a few large categories here that we can go through individually here. And I do want to note, though, that there are a lot of programs out there to provide technical assistance and financial assistance, cost share programs to do good wildlife habitat work on your property. So USDA is the place to go for that. And you can always contact me and I can put you in touch with somebody as well. But yeah, there's a lot of things that can be done that people aren't aware of. So forest management is one of those things that, I could have an hour-long talk on this, so I won't go into the details, but just to let you know that managing your forest either commercially with a commercial timber harvest or non-commercially can be very helpful to providing good habitat. You can mechanically remove trees with a chainsaw, or there's grinding machines, skid steers with grinders. You can also do a lot with herbicide and the very precise single tree removal with hack and squirt methods or girdling methods, where you can do things to release mass producing trees. So we'll do this a lot where we've got some good oaks that we want to really encourage those oaks to produce maximum acorns and to reduce competition around them. So we'll just go in and we'll selectively kill some of the non-desirable trees, some of your maples or sweet gums around there to allow those trees to really thrive. And then another key objective with any kind of management is getting sunlight on the ground, because if you don't have sunlight on the ground, you won't have this herbaceous vegetation that they need for nesting and brooding. The amount of sunlight on the ground will really vary based on your objectives. So in some situations, you might want to, only remove a few trees, just to provide a scattering of light. But in other places, you want to provide a nice big chunk of nesting habitat, you might do a lot heavier removal. So really depends on your objectives there and what you currently have present. So establishing early successional habitat in sort of like a non-forest situation can be done in a lot of ways. You can plant native grasses and wildflowers. This can be done in crop fields along the edges or the entire field. A lot of the USDA programs are really well suited to doing this and will provide cost share to do that. Kind of an overlooked way to provide this habitat is just a fallow fields, like the old, set aside program back in the, I guess it was the 40s and 50s. They retired fields, and they would rotate their fields, their crop fields around. Provides great habitat. There's a lot of good native plants in the seed bank that just need time to be released. So you can do that. You can also do some edge feathering. Here's an example of some edge feathering, where just a few trees are felled on the edge, and then in a few years you start to get this brushy, this thicket that provides good cover along the edge. Sort of that soften the edge. The transition between the mature forest and the field is softened. So a lot of people talk about food plots, or they want to plant something. Honestly, this is the least bang for your buck. It's expensive. It takes a lot of time. A lot of the research has shown that the amount of forage and the amount of benefits you get from this isn't as great as if you manage that native vegetation. However, a lot of people are still interested in doing that. And if you are going to plant a food plot, some sort of like legume, clover-based mix is usually preferred over just a straight food plot. And I just want to mention that, all of these things, you have to continually manage it. Otto Leopold, the father of modern wildlife management, he talked about in the 30s that the axe, cow, plow, and fire were the ways to restore wildlife species. Seemed a little counterintuitive, but things like disking, timber harvest, prescribed fire, which again could be a whole nother talk about the benefits of using prescribed fire to rejuvenate that habitat and promote that good green vegetation. These are the types of things that you can continually work on, and if they're done appropriately and the right time and with the right objectives in mind, can be the types of things that are really helpful to manage habitat. Couple quick take homes as I wrap up here. Turkeys are adaptable, but current conditions and predator communities may result in future population declines if we don't start thinking about how to reverse that. Based on our research and others, it seems like hen survival during the nesting season and pulp production, low pulp production, is probably limiting. And if you're a landowner, you should consider increasing that nesting and breeding habitat. A lot of options available that I just went over. Couldn't go into too great a detail, but one last quick note is don't feed the wild turkeys. Okay, we're trying to keep our wild turkeys wild, and we do have situations where when they're habituated to humans, they can become a nuisance, and try to minimize that. So if you see turkeys coming to your feeder, try to cut that feed off and let them do their thing in the woods. So hopefully I didn't go too long over there, John, and be happy to answer any questions if there's time.
Yeah, absolutely, Bob. Very good. Excellent presentation. And I just want to comment that we've had 50 participants on this presentation today, which is a really good response. So I knew this was going to be a really good subject. So we'll dive into the questions because we do have a lot of questions. I tried to screen some stuff out. Unfortunately, it looks like we have a lot of stuff that's pretty unique. So we'll go ahead and get started. Is there any concern that increasing coyote population will adversely affect the number of turkeys in the state?
Yes, so that's a really good question, and right now I would say that I would rather have. I think I was talking to John earlier about this. We have turkeys in the western part of the state that are doing better than the birds in the eastern part of the state. There's coyotes there. There's not nearly as many coyotes in the eastern part. So my point being is that a lot of times coyotes will keep those medium-sized predators out of the area. They'll keep their densities lower. I'd rather have coyotes than red foxes based on the data that we have right now. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Is there any concern? Oh, I'm sorry, I read that one. Is the growth in the central area due to less natural predators in suburban areas and less hunting pressure?
I'd love to know the answer to that, but I would say it's definitely not due to hunting pressure. Okay, so we only are hunting the male segment of that population, which isn't affecting, the breeding population isn't affected. There's always a kind of a surplus of males out there. So there's a few things that may be going on, and we're not quite sure. Hopefully, we will know. New Jersey will have one study site that is in a suburban area, so hopefully we can understand why those turkeys are doing better in those types of situations. Stay tuned for that. Maybe I'll come back.
Yeah, we used to have, when I used to live up in Jersey, we used to have a turkey used to come up in a parking lot outside of an office building that I used to work at, just outside of Camden, New Jersey. It was the weirdest thing you ever saw, and just used to come and used to sit in the parking lot. It was really unusual. So let's see here. You mentioned trees that are vital to turkey habitat for roosting. Is the opposite true as well? That is, do they need open ground or early successional habitat? I think we pretty much covered that, but if you want to touch anything else on that.
Do they need open ground early? Yeah, so they do best in a mix of habitats. So you definitely need some amount of trees, but then that sort of that early successional habitat can be in the form of forested areas that just have understory, a good, well-developed understory, and they can do well in that. They don't really need those openings. They need some sort of habitat to nest and raise their young in. So that abundant insects and cover for those poults and their nests.
Okay, is Pennsylvania has introduced fishers that will take turkey off the roofs. They're also looking to introduce martins as well. Is Maryland concerned with these moving south of the Mason-Dixon line?
I'm not terribly concerned with that at this point. I think both of those predators, and I would have to look into the biology of those species a little more, but I think that they would occur in fairly low densities and probably would have, minimal impacts compared to some of these other predators like raccoons or foxes.
I'm going to follow up with a simple thought there. Do you think we already have fishers out in Western Maryland?
I don't. I'd have to talk to our fur bear biologist about that. And I'm in the eastern part of the state, so
Understood. I was just kind of curious if you knew off the top of your head. That's no problem.
I don't. I don't.
Trees for roosting, ground cover for nesting. I'm sorry. Let me skip over that. Do you think the insecticides on ag seed, such as Roundup Ready Seed, is impacting reproduction rates?
That's a great question. So the neonicotinoids, which is the treated seed that is now planted almost exclusively in commercial crop fields, is definitely a concern. We don't have any hard data on whether it's affecting turkeys right now, but I know there are some studies going on around the country looking at that. It's definitely something that we're keeping an eye on.
Okay.
Yeah, good question.
The Pennsylvania Game Commission works with University of Georgia by sending eggs for hatching research. Is Maryland involved with this collection and research also?
No, we haven't sent any eggs down to the University of Georgia. they're getting a lot of help from other projects, and honestly, they have larger sample sizes and they find more eggs than we do. So, like I said, we only had one nest abandoned that we actually got our hands on some eggs. But yeah, there's a lot of work going on around the country, a lot of good things. You know, every state can't kind of do everything, but you know, as a whole, I think we'll learn a lot about what's happening with turkeys over the next 5 or 6 years. I think when all these studies wrap up.
Is high pathogen avian influenza affecting turkey populations?
Yeah, as of now, avian flu is not something we're terribly concerned with. We are testing for it, but I think currently only 3 turkeys in the country, or maybe 5 turkeys in the country, have ever been positive for avian flu. So it's probably not something that is a widespread problem. The disease that we're more interested in is LPDV, which is that's the abbreviation for lymphoproliferative disease virus. That's a disease that is fairly recently documented. I believe it was first noted in 2009, and that one doesn't seem to be outright killing birds when they become infected, but it's possible it could impact survival or reproduction. So all the studies that are ongoing now, including ours, we're sampling those birds for that LPDV virus, and then we can compare the birds that are infected versus the ones that aren't infected and see if there is a difference in, you know, their survival or reproduction. So we, again, you know, a couple more years, we will have some good answers to some of these questions.
All right. Now, Bob, we are at 1 o'clock right now. Do you have some time to continue on these questions? We don't have a lot left.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So everybody, just to let you know that we thank you for coming out, but we're going to continue answering the questions. So if you want to hang on a little bit longer, we'll just keep right on rolling. We shouldn't be too much longer. Do you see different ranges for birds in Western Mountains versus Eastern Shore area legal harvest? Was Eastern impacted by weather and flooding due to heavy rains in low-lying areas?
So let me get that. You said, was there a difference in range? I think you said. I was trying to find it, but my screen's skipping around. But no, it seemed like the range was similar for the two regions. They used about the same amount of acreage. Yeah, legal harvest, right? That was bearded hens. So there was one bearded hen harvested in that spring season, and then yeah, we didn't see any flooding of nests. It was all due to predation. So yeah, that wasn't something. It's something that we were thinking we might see because a lot of these birds were nesting near floodplains or in floodplains, but they generally found a little higher patch of ground to nest on.
Do the birds have a scent that predators can track, or do they more likely find birds by stumbling across a nest or actually seeing a hen around the nest? And I think specifically they were the question directed at predators from the air.
Well, I believe that was a different person, but I'll just say in general that yes, I think that most mammalian predators are keying in on the scent of those birds because these hens are sitting motionless, very low to the ground, and a lot of the predation events happened at night. So I think that you know, we can see the exact moment that these birds get attacked. So yeah, I think a lot of that was due to the scent of the hen. Something interesting that I didn't really report on. It's kind of a it's a theory that has been around for a long time, but any kind of ground nesting bird um, they give off more scent if it's moist. If it's we have a rainy period, so it's called the wet hen theory. It's something that I think that a lot of us feel like is a real thing, and we definitely saw it this year. So we had 1 week when the bulk of these hens just began to incubate their nests, that it rained almost every day on the eastern shore, and we lost almost every one of those nests. And I think that a lot of that's just because those hens, like, I mean, if you've been around poultry or any kind of, pen raised, game birds, they're pretty stinky when they get wet. So I think it's reasonable to think that these foxes and raccoons can smell the nesting hens a lot better after they're sitting there and they're wet. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. But
At what age do poults generally begin flying? And now I wanted to mention that we had Brenda Beal, who's been given a little bit of
yeah,
assistance in answering some of these questions, but I'll just go ahead and
yeah. So yeah, she's about right, about 8 to 10 days old. They can fly very short distances. But yeah, they're all of our birds were nesting in trees by the time they were 4 weeks old. So yeah, they're probably between 3 and 4 weeks is when they're regularly getting up off the ground. So,
do deer eat a lot of vegetation in the woods? How does this impact poult survival?
yeah, great question, Ann. Yeah, that's definitely something to think about. I mean, it affects vegetation. I mean, everywhere that deer browsing. I have a photo from another talk that I give on quail where we put up some just small little fence exclosures, and the ragweed inside those exclosures was 3 feet tall, and outside the ragweed was just a few inches tall. Um, and that's not even, that's they're eating a lot of things that we don't even realize that they're eating. So it can drastically affect the brooding and nesting habitat when you have uh, overabundant deer populations.
Does Japanese honeysuckle provide covered nesting turkeys, or is the growth too dense to be of any benefit?
It's a good question. Probably it's. I mean, I don't have any firsthand experience that I can recall with finding birds nesting in honeysuckle, um, but it probably provides some benefit if there's nothing else around. But if there's other native species that provide that same type of cover, then it I think that would work as well. So as long as it's not taking over the entire area, it's probably not the worst thing that could be out there.
And I think you touched on this before, but I'll just clarify. Louis Gorman had asked, has there been any research on wet hen theory?
Oh,
Is that what we were talking about before?
yeah, that's what I was talking about. And
Okay.
yeah, there's been some, and there's sort of mixed results on it. So it's one of those things that it maybe depends on probably what it is there's a lot of things that can impact nesting. And we do these studies and we've got a sample of birds, um, to tease out exactly what are the most important factors is difficult. And I think there's a lot of researchers that think that there is some validity to that theory, that when these hens are wetter, they're more vulnerable to predation, but it's very hard. We would need fine scale weather data, at that exact nesting location. And again, it's just there's a lot of other things out there. There's just the randomness of predators. There's habitat issues, weather, and things like that. So um, I there has been some, but there's no, I don't think there's any clear cut, like, yes, this is very important.
All right. I have a question myself, and this ties into two aspects here. The one being, of course, that since I was Somerset County forester for Maryland Forest Service back in 2022, noticed there was a lot of greenbrier and rubus, particularly blackberry, down in that neck of the woods. And I'm wondering if that provides good cover for turkeys that are nesting. And that being said, it leads to the second part of my question, whether or not I should be planting this in areas that I can to help areas that I own that would, see beneficial see a benefit if I in fact did that sort of plantings.
Yeah, yeah. I think that based on our birds, again, it's just 1 year of data here, but then just, noticing where turkeys nest in other years when I've encountered them, they definitely do use blackberry and greenbrier a lot. That's a type of cover that, they're very secure in there as far as being seen. And so, as far as planting it, you could plant it, but I think, a lot of times that stuff's out there anyway. If you just allow that sunlight in to, an area, or, you just don't mow an area for 2 or 3 years, you're going to get it anyway. You're going to get a flush of that stuff. But yeah, they'll definitely use it. I will say it was interesting in that this year we had some hens that were killed because they were in greenbrier. They were nesting in greenbrier that was so dense that based on what we could find at the nest site, they couldn't escape. So like they just went back a little trail that they could barely fit through, nested, but they were completely surrounded by this greenbrier. And then this, a fox presumably would go in that trail, kind of block the exit route, and kill it. So again, this stuff's like not easy. Like it obviously she felt like it was a very safe nesting spot, and it was, as far as being concealed and they couldn't see her. But when they smelled her in there, then they could actually kill the adult. So again, every bird is different, I think, and I think people think that it's like very black and white, but a lot of times I think it's just whatever that hen feels like is a good spot, and they're not always necessarily good at what they're doing. They don't really know what to do. So
Yeah, I
but
can
they
speak.
do generally, they do
Go ahead.
pick those spots. Yeah.
I was going to say, I can speak from experience. I was caught 15 minutes in a greenbrier patch doing a forest assessment, and I was like, this is ridiculous. And I'm like, they're going to find my body sometime, out here in the woods.
Yeah.
Anyway, last question from Lewis Gorman, I think we'll call it a wrap, is since greenbrier is heavily browsed by deer, is controlling deer population more important for turkey management?
I would say that yeah, I mean, it can't hurt to control the deer population, to keep it at a healthy level that's in balance with the habitat, without a doubt. If you have so many deer that you're eliminating that ground cover, that understory, if they're just eating up everything, you will impact your habitat, not only for turkeys, but for a lot of other species. So I think that, how important is that relative to, some other things, we're not sure. And clearly, like this research to look at, the impacts of deer relative to turkeys, we're just trying to understand, what makes a successful spot for a turkey to nest, and then, if we went another step further with looking at deer, it would get complicated quickly. But yeah, I don't think you can go wrong by keeping your deer population at a healthy level.
Yeah, and I think that circles back around to the reason for my question, because I have a lot of heavy deer browse that I need to get addressed, and that's why I would think about planting blackberries, as I do have some openings that are sunny enough and to support the blackberries, and I was thinking along those lines. So
Right.
okay, Bob, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. This was terrific. We get a big thank you from everybody for your time today. Once again, remember, folks, we will not have a presentation next month. Our next presentation will be in January, but I want to again thank Bob Long for his time out here today. And I want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. It seemed like a really good time to be having a talk on turkeys, right?
Yeah, well, thank you. And if anybody has questions, feel free to email or give me a call.
Yeah, Bob, you want to drop your email into the chat?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah.
Just give it 1 second, folks, so that you can get this real quick. There you go.
There you go.
bob.long@maryland.gov. Again, thank you for your time, and we appreciate it, and have yourself a good week. Take care.